Hello and welcome to another episode of the CollabTalk Podcast, the show that's dedicated to exploring how and why we collaborate, whether one-on-one, within small teams, or across an entire organization. Through conversations with experts, real-world stories, and practical insights, we break down what makes collaboration work or fail and how to improve it. And my guest today is Dr. Darren Pulsipher. Hello, Darren.
Hey, Christian, how you doing?
Pretty good. Chief Solutions Architect for Public Sector at Intel in Folsom, California, and host of the weekly podcast, Embracing Digital Transformation. I know you've got a couple shows going on, but
I do just
around that. I'll let you go and do that. Well, it's like me. There's a lot of stuff going on. Today we're talking about, so good meat and potato topic here, aligning people, process, and technology for business transformation. So welcome.
Well, hey, thanks, Christian. Christian and I, he hasn't mentioned this yet. We go back almost 30 years. That means we're old, Christian.
I know. My kids remind me of that. Yeah,
that's right. Way back in business school, we just kicked it off as a team back then. We've written several books together and articles and everything. But I thank you, Christian, for having me on the show. I recently, as Christian mentioned, started my podcast about 4 years ago, Embracing Digital Transformation. I've had a cool opportunity to interview over 200 executives or technicians all around digital transformation. And the stories are wild. Crazy stories of people that have failed miserably and had some
those are the
success.
best stories.
Yeah, it reminds me of business school when we talk about Kodak failure, the Colorado airport disaster that when they deployed that the first time, all major mistakes, nothing technical.
Yeah,
which is fascinating.
Well, that's the thing. It's I always say about like technology, it does it or doesn't do it. It's 0 or 1. It either has the features, the capability, or it doesn't around that. So many of the failures are in the planning or the lack thereof of planning for that change, or all the cultural aspects.
Yeah, I think the culture thing is number one. That's right. What I primarily seen when I talk to people and when I've helped organizations go through change. Now, something really interesting happened in 2020 with COVID. In fact, it was March 13th, 2020, I remember the day. It was a Friday, the 13th, when the whole world turned upside down with COVID. COVID did something amazing to culture and to process and technology. People had these roadmaps that were 36-month roadmaps or 4 or 5 year roadmaps on technology adoption that all of a sudden within a month and a half were all realized almost immediately.
Yeah.
On remote work, on security, on the list goes on and on and on. And the question I asked every CEO and CIO after that was, why? Why did it happen so quickly? And the answer was because it had to.
Yeah. Is it funny? I bring this point up all the time that it's all of those companies that said there's no way, we're not ready, we can't do this, and figure it out. It's like they were able to figure out that was one of the I always phrase it as nobody ever talks about the positive sides of COVID. But it was something to come out of that was organizations realized, hey, we can actually do this. And while a lot of companies are saying, hey, we've got our in-office policy, we're kind of going back, it's not entirely. I think hybrid is the reality now for the majority of companies.
It is, but we're going to see, and just like every culture shift that we've seen in the past, and you can see that with bell bottoms in the 70s into what skinny jeans in the 80s and 90s. There's this spectrum that swings way far. So that's what we're seeing right now with a culture shift that everyone's trying. Oh, you have to be in the office 100% of the time. Yeah, that's not going to cut it, right? In the long term, productivity will go down. Then they'll go back to hybrid, and then now they're more equipped for this. So that big whiplash that we saw with everyone going remote and now everyone being mandated to go back to work, it's a culture shock thing, right?
It's the other side of this. I mean, you mentioned this, so I have to mention it again, is like, and bell bottoms are kind of back right now, apparently with the
I know.
kids,
What is
which
that?
is, it's like, no, no,
As children of
please.
the 80s, we can't handle
Oh, no, it's awful. No, I mean, I remember in the late 70s, I hated them then. So I'm on message there.
So, of course. Well, and one thing that I did find, and I'm seeing today with the next revolution, it really is a revolution of generative AI, is we kind of fell back into pre-COVID way of doing things with adopting generative AI. Scared, culture shift. I'm scared of my job. There's a lot, and then you've got other camps at the same time that are just diving wholeheartedly in, especially executives saying, I don't need people anymore. I can just use Gen AI to do all this work.
Right.
And it's like, whoa, 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 mass chaos is going on. So we're in a really weird funk right now. Mandates to go back into the office, massive layoffs, Gen AI is starting to rise up, all that disruption, and you can include Trump and Musk in the disruption, right? Because they're disrupting government on purpose, but it's making a disruption across the whole industry. Now is when culture needs to survive and get through these sorts of things, as long as culture is pointing to digital transformation.
Yeah.
So it's a weird time for sure.
I mean, there's other things, just patterns that repeat themselves. But I think overall, I mean, I think of it like to build a muscle, you have to break down the tissue, for it to be able to heal and become stronger and grow. I think with like what's happening in the U.S. government, again, we got people watching all over the world, but with the U.S. government, like you can't bake a cake if you don't crack some eggs. A nice way of putting that. There's going to be disruptions, and it was bloated in so many ways anyway.
And inefficient,
Yeah, and
right?
so like
But
that,
we're seeing that in large corporations too.
right.
A
Well,
lot of inefficiency
well,
and
one of the problems with a lot of process and methodology and structure, we go and we build bureaucracy, but you also have to take a break from doing that to actually look at the methodology on a regular basis. You need to, and this goes back to, again, this is like late 90s when we were in business school and talking about Kaizen, the Japanese word for the process of continual improvement. You constantly look at, okay, here we are. I think of Deming's voice,
yes, I do
you
too.
optimize the system, constantly looking at, okay, we've achieved like the highest numbers. Awesome. Now let's figure out how from here, new baseline, how do we optimize this system? The
Well,
reality is you don't maintain that high level because
right.
outward, all the things coming in, the business, the economy, kind of all those things, beating it back down. You constantly need to be looking at the changing factors and adjusting for them.
Well, I think companies do adjust for the changing factors, but they make a huge mistake. They add process. They don't modify. Well, because that process has done good for us so far, as far as we know. So I'm going to keep that and I'm going to add to it because there's new factors affecting. So I'm going to add to it. So what you end up with is process bloat. Instead, because it's much, much harder to look at process and re-engineer process.
Well, so yes, about process, but I would make another parallel here is around content. So we have content bloat. And there's different factors, reasons for that. I mean, one, the dramatic drop down of storage and cloud storage and things around that. And so companies just said, look, we're getting hurt by this content that we used to have. Now it's not, we can't find it or whatever it is. But the way that you combat that is to have, again, it's that the steps, the planning for it. So the predestination of the content types out there, of just talking about data in general, and end of life, the life cycle management of those things. We need
Yeah.
to treat our process, the methodology, the same way. There should be a review cycle, and as you're right, as part of that, it's not just about adding on the new, but it's looking and saying what needs to now go because of that.
Yeah, no, I absolutely, and this is actually what I help organizations work through when I talk to them. Because at Intel, what I do is I get airdropped into large government organizations all over the world, and we evaluate where they're currently at, both in people, process, policy, and technology. And some examples around this are I was up in Canadian government and the technology had shifted so that their policies that they had were not adequate in purchasing new types of hardware. So they were stuck. They could not, what's right, procure hyper-converged infrastructure. It was against their policies. So we had to go back and reevaluate their policies, their processes, and all the things that work around how that all works. So you can't just come in with technology or culture or process. You got to look holistically across the board how they interact. And guess what? Most organizations don't know. Most organizations have no clue how this all fits together. So coming up with a way of helping them understand that, you should see their eyes just, wow, I had no idea.
Well, I
And
love it, like,
then the
oh,
answer, it's really easy to see what to fix after that.
yeah.
It's amazing.
I was going to say that. So I know that you built your one of the podcasts around like the 6 pillars of
Yeah.
digital transformation. Maybe you could go through and talk about that process and how, like, and do you use that? Is it 6 pillars that you use in the
I
day
use,
job
yeah,
stuff? Or
yeah, exactly. So what we found was when we talked to organizations, we found what we call the 6 pillars of digital transformation. These are 6 areas that we see almost every mission solution or capability that a government needs in order to provide services to the constituents, the citizens, or to protect a warfighter, whatever the case may be. And they're ubiquitous computing, which is modernized computing, which covers cloud computing, containerization, DevOps, quantum computing. It says, Darren, that covers everything. Well, it really doesn't. There's a lot more, right? Then there's edge computing. These are things outside of the data center, outside of the cloud, including cell phones, laptops, Humvees, that sensors. There's a whole gamut on edge computing. Then we also have artificial intelligence. And I really don't like this term because when I talk about artificial intelligence, that pillar, I really talk about data analytics, which is even broader than AI. But AI is the buzzword du jour, so I got to use it. So that's a pillar. And then we've got data management. This one is forgotten.
yeah,
And the
where I
data
spent a good
management,
portion of my career is on that side of it.
yeah, exactly, Christian. But most people ignore it. They go,
Yeah.
"Oh, I got data. Data's ubiquitous. It's everywhere." Well, no, you got to manage it, right? There's
No, Darren,
governance and all that.
you just drop in AI because it'll do it all now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the same mistake of like saying we're going to upgrade our software to the latest version and it'll handle
It'll
that.
just fix everything, but that's not the case, right? And then the last 2 pillars are really interesting. Cybersecurity. Everyone needs cybersecurity. And the most obscure one, but probably the one that's driving the most connectivity through the whole world, is advanced communications, which is 5G, 6G, Wi Fi 6 and 7, advanced comms. So, what we found was every single solution we looked at touched every one of these 6 pillars, but they touched them in different ways. Maybe they were heavy AI and light cybersecurity, and that was fine. But what we have is we have a best practice in each one of those 6 pillars. And we kind of made a little bit of a mistake. We bought into the culture of government, which is an interesting culture when it comes to technical debt, because government funds everything by project. So you can go out and look at all the big projects that are out there, and they fund the project soup to nuts, process, software, hardware, everything soup to nuts. So what we created with this is we created these little temples of technology, is what I call them, with the 6 pillars supporting them, and they're awesome and they work really good. and I stand up this one project over here and it's kicking it and no big deal. And I stand up another project over here, and then they have another project that says integrate the two. So I have to stand up a whole nother project, and they don't talk to each other. And we created these silos of technology. And that's a big problem. So in order to efficiently move forward, we had to break down our approach a little bit. We still talk heavily about the 6 pillars, but we build a solid foundation now of technology and process and culture change that's required to support several different missions built on that same foundation. And that foundation we call the government enterprise architecture reference. And we're having tons of success with it, because now government can say, oh, I can actually reuse parts of my project from project A and project B. I don't have to fund the whole thing. I only need to fund part of it, and I can get the job done in 3 months instead of 3 years. And it's going gangbusters wild right now.
So have been through this, and that, of course, there are strong parallels with, if you go look at most large consulting organizations, they go in again, they have something similar. Well, they've got a stack that
Yeah.
they have their subject matter expertise, the depth into it, and integrated across all those things. And so when you're working with a large consulting company on that, they generally have like the standard things that they'll go and promote. Like most of the largest consulting companies will say, whatever you have, we'll work with you. We've got people that have that experience, but they have built their practice around like a standardized stack around the
Right,
thing.
exactly.
Having said all that, my personal experience, and having worked with some of these large consulting and mid-sized consulting companies, is that they still run into a wall around the cultural aspects of that. So when you go in those examples, and this you can anonymize the experience, so you're not hurting anybody out there. But how accepting were they of the technology solution versus the cultural change?
I never go in with technology first. I talk to them culturally first, and it's been highly successful going that route, because I tell them right up front, I have nothing to sell you. I'm Intel. You're going to buy my stuff anyway, whether it's in the cloud, on-prem, or whatever. There's an 80% chance, because even though people think Intel's dead, we're still 80% market segment share across the board.
Yeah.
Let's just be brutally honest. I mean, that's huge. So when I go in and talk to him, I say, let's culturally find out what your problems are that are preventing you from moving forward, whether it's upskilling your people, whether it's you're not a data-centric focused organization, whether you're too verticalized or too horizontalized. We break that down, and it's been wonderful to see organizations go through that change, but is painful. Oh, it's so painful. And you've got to find the right group of people. Both, you need executive sponsorship, and you also need to identify 4 different groups of people in the organization. Your change agents, and those you just hug. You give them a hug every day when you can and say, guys, we're here to make this change. You've got your sheeple. These are all the people that just follow. I'm just going wherever it looks best. And those you have to be somewhat concerned about, but not that much. Then your culture keepers. These are typically middle management, VP level, that have built their fiefdoms. They want to keep things the same they are. They're making plenty of money. All they want now is power and influence. And so they're culture keepers. And then these culture keepers, they hire a couple individual contributors that I call assassins. And the assassins, they will try everything they can to torpedo the change that's coming. And you and I both know this because we've been through this.
Been through this many times, but
right? What do you do? What do you do with the assassins and the culture keepers? There's 2 techniques. You fire them, or you put them in a box, and you make it so they can't influence outside of that box. And it sounds horrible, but I've seen big, huge changes. Like at Intel, we had this problem at Intel with the big, huge change that we were trying to make. The culture keepers won. They kept the culture the same.
Yeah.
Right. We've seen it successful. I've seen it successful in small companies that you and I helped run. We won't throw them under the bus.
Yeah.
Where we had to put people in a box, and
We
we
had to,
had to
we had to clean
actually.
up a lot. I was going to say that. So Darren and I worked on a project together for a year for a company, and even though it's like we both left at that, and I didn't renew the contract or anything, and left just after you did, but it was necessary. I was like, you almost played like an Elon role there, Darren, at that
Yes, I
that
know.
period. But to go in, but it was because there were things that needed to be scuttled. And without getting the detail, I mean, we uncovered um, ethical violations, illegal, like that. We referred
Yeah,
one
it was.
one major issue to the county DA. Like that's how serious it was. There was just junk going on, and there were vendors that had personal relationships with people that were doing shady things, and we cleaned up a lot of that. But then we had to put other people in boxes, but it was necessary for them to then usher in like the next major shift.
Absolutely. But the key to that, any success in a cultural shift, is executive support. And you need to tell them it's going to be painful at first. And I can't remember the name of the curve, but it's the change curve where everything dips first and then the benefit comes later.
Yeah, well,
And
it's the adoption curve is like that too. So it's like
yeah,
you get the high, you're on the buzz, you're up at and then it drops down like the trough of reality, it's called. And then
yeah.
then people say, "Oh, I see." And AI, generative AI, is kind of going through this, where it's all the hype, and we're now on the downside into the trough, where people are realizing it's not all this stuff and the scary things. We still have downward to go in there before people realize here's how it actually fits. Here's how it actually changes and benefits my business on the other side of that.
Well, and that the depth of that trough is what you have to articulate to the executive team, because the depth and the width,
Yeah.
because it's painful. It's extremely painful when you go through these culture shifts, but they have to happen. If
Yeah.
they don't, then you end up like Kodak or RCA or Xerox. Now, Xerox is still around, but people don't know this about Xerox. Xerox has produced some of the most profound technological advances in computing ever. And they have not been able to capitalize on it because they couldn't see beyond printing copies.
Yeah. Well, hey, a lot of the youngins that don't know some of the history, like the whole modern interface of Windows and of
The mouse.
iOS, of the Mac, the creation of the Mac, that was a Xerox.
That
Xerox
was in
part.
Xerox. Yeah,
Yeah.
the mouse, the touch screen, Wi-Fi. I mean, the list goes on and on.
Yeah.
But they weren't able to capitalize on it because it was not in their core business. They couldn't see the cultural shift that they needed to make.
Yeah.
Other companies are similar to that as well. IBM has gone through that. They had a lot of fundamental research that was going on. They couldn't figure out how to capitalize on that and shift the company, because they said, well, we've been successful. Why should we mess with success? And IBM's a fraction of what they used to be.
Yeah.
3M, another one. GE, another one. The list goes on and on. Because I think culture, that people say culture doesn't change. Culture morphs very
Constantly.
slowly,
Yeah, but constantly. Yeah, it's
but
constantly evolving.
constantly.
Yeah.
So when you're trying to interrupt, and especially when you've got a large culture that has momentum moving into a direction, and you're trying to interrupt it, it takes a lot of energy to make that change, to steer it into another direction. And if you need to do it quickly, you probably have to cut off some of the mass
Yeah.
that's there to decrease the momentum.
Well, one of the problems for a lot of leaders is that it's difficult for them to envision like what's next, like what's the path out. One of the things that I love, and I wish it were bigger, like in the Microsoft ecosystem, in the Microsoft 365 side of Microsoft's business, so the desktop productivity. But if you get into the information management, so SharePoint and Teams, kind of all the tools around that, there is this maturity model around that. So it was developed by then a consultant, Sadie Van Buren developed the first one over the SharePoint model. It's kind of been evolved out to that. But the beauty of having that maturity model approach, like you have your 6 pillars, you can have that maturity model, and this is the old CMM model. So it's like
Yeah. That's exactly
100
what it
through
is.
500 or 700, or however many levels that you have there. But the benefit of that is that you can go in, and I've done this as a consultant, where you go in when you do the initial assessment and you talk high level about the methodology and say, where you are across these pillars is you're 100 here, you're 300 here, and your goal isn't to be like 55555. It's like your goal may only be to get to 300 there, maintain 300 here, get to 400 here, 200 you're fine at these different ones
I'm
depending
glad
on
you
the type of
brought that.
business.
I'm glad you brought that up, because being able to map where you're currently at is extremely important. And we actually develop maturity maps for each of the 6 pillars. Where are you compared to the ultimate organization, right? And people go, "Oh, I'm getting close to the ultimate organization," and I go, "Give me 6 months, because I'm moving that even further right, because new processes, new techniques are being used that are even better, that we can move in that direction." So I totally agree with you on this. Understanding where you are and where you want to go is critical in these digital transformations as well. Not just, hey, everyone needs to work harder. Well, that's
Yeah.
dumb, right? I mean, you need a direction both in process, people, and technology, and there are maps for that that you need to take advantage of.
Yeah, that's why I love that whole idea of the maturity model as a way to communicate it. Again, the more detail that you can add to that of where you are, the hardest part. I mean, if you think about like individually leaders, it's really hard to do an inward looking self assessment, to look at the id, to like what my personality type, my style, those kinds of things. We're easy to identify it for others. It's difficult to look inwardly around that. My experience is that it's similar with organizations. They do a bad job at self-assessment, because you
Absolutely.
do a survey, you ask like, "Hey, are you guys doing this?" You're like, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure we're
The,
doing this."
the
Like,
surveys are always a joke, because
right,
everyone knows, or they're afraid to answer the surveys because they're identifiable. My job's going to be at risk if I answer this truthfully, right? So internal surveys don't work. I haven't seen them work, right? Unless you've got engineers that are like at Intel, or workers that are okay of criticizing their bosses and not worried that their bosses may find out who they are. But
do you,
that's
do
very
you
rare.
do you think that that's like, is that why so many digital transformations fail, because they don't properly they don't realistically assess like where they actually are, that they don't come to terms with that?
No, I maybe a little bit, but I think it's more on the motivator side. Look, COVID taught us that IT can be a force of transformation, right? But
Yeah.
why? Because it was forced on them, right? They had no choice. It had to happen, or the business would suffer. And that urgency that COVID gave, and that it was the right direction. I mean, CEOs were just writing checks, whatever it takes to keep us alive, right? That will happen. So I think a lot of it is motivation. Another great example: when I was CIO with you, right? Um, our email server, I asked for a $500,000 to upgrade our email server. We were hosting it ourselves at the time. I was told, hey, there's no budget for that. 3 weeks later, our email server went down. There was plenty of budget all of a sudden, right? There was budget for lots of things, right? And instead of spending $500,000, we spent over $1 million in because of the failure.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of times IT directors and CIOs are not given the skills they need in order to articulate the urgency of certain things, or to show what the ROI. I don't know if it's ROI, because The
Well,
finance guys get in there, kind of screw things up.
but
It's the
but you're
potential
right.
ROI.
Pain drives so many. You think of
Pain, yeah,
cybersecurity.
pain.
Most
Yeah.
companies don't think about it. Putting again, we're terrible at preventive measures. It's when they don't think about it until there's a breach, and what's the cost of the breach?
Well,
Extreme.
and Christian, that's exactly what I found in my PhD dissertation, because my dissertation was on critical infrastructure cybersecurity best practices. No, critical infrastructure. This is our water treatment plants,
Mhm.
electrical plants, hospitals, chemical plants, all critical infrastructure, right? And their comment is it costs too much to do cybersecurity. That's it. Well, a breach, could you imagine not having power for a month? What the consequences of that are? And luckily, the new director of CISA is really putting a more emphasis on this, but there's still not enough pain or motivation. Maybe the right word is
Yeah.
motivation. There's not enough motivation to get organizations to change. And until that motivation is there, nothing really helps them move. So we got to come up with better ways of motivating organizations.
Do you see differences between public sector versus private in this regard? Is it pretty
Oh,
much operate
absolutely,
the same way?
absolutely,
Wow.
absolutely. Well, hmm, let me back that up. I would say absolutely for mid-sized businesses. Mid-sized businesses are trying to survive every day. So they are more agile, they can move. Big corporations, Fortune 500, they are slow like government. Why? Because they're full of bureaucracy. And why are they full of bureaucracy? Bureaucracy is put into place to help with risk management. So large corporations, even large corporations that have our founding principle is risk taking, right? Any big huge organization says our founding, risk, we accept risk. They're full of it. They're all about risk aversion, right? Because there's too much to lose. And that's the same with big government agencies as well. If you mess something up, especially in Department of Defense, if you mess something up, people die, right? And same with critical infrastructure. That's one of the things that if I mess up, so why not keep things the way they are? Because I understand them, I can control them,
Mhm.
they're well known. As soon as you start bringing new things in, I get nervous because I can't see that motivator isn't there. That those protections that I put into place aren't there anymore, and now I'm lost. So there's a lot of play here. So finding that motivation, finding ways to help organizations overcome that, regardless of government or large organizations. Small organizations, they got plenty of motivators,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
Startups are throw caution to the wind and plow forward, right, with change because I'm here to be disruptive.
yeah.
And that's what we're seeing with Elon. That's what Elon's trying to do with government. That's what he did with Twitter. People were so pissed at him about Twitter. And I thought it was a brilliant move. He did exactly what he knew he was going to do.
Yeah. Well, I like that. And one of the
Disrupt.
negative comments there too is that, is that it's like, oh yeah, and that's why they're suffering. I said, what are you talking about? They were never Twitter was never profitable before that. It's like, and now they're on that path, or they are. I don't know if they
Well,
continue to-
whether they're profitable or not, Elon got out of Twitter what he wanted.
yeah, yeah.
Right. And
I-
so that's why people, well, it wasn't a great business thing. I'm like, well, I beg to differ. I learned this working in China a lot. What motivates China is different what motivates US companies. What motivates US companies is bottom line profit and revenue at the beginning because I want someone to invest in me, but that's it. So understanding that motivator is critical, but it drives maybe poor decisions on short-term profit. In China, what motivates them is very, very different. It's number of employees that I can hire. Whoa, that's a huge change. So the only reason I generate revenue for my company is so I can hire more people. Because the more people I hire, the more power I have with the Chinese government. Why? Because there's more tax money to collect for the Chinese government. You have to remember, business in China is not private business. They are all controlled by the Chinese government. So I love it when people say, well, ByteDance is not a Chinese company. It's not controlled by the Chinese government. You're full of it. Of course it is, right? It's all about power and influence. So Chinese companies are motivated differently than US companies. And so when you get someone like Elon that comes in where money's not a motivator for Elon, he's got plenty of it. You have to identify what's motivating him. And so it seems to me what's motivating him is efficiency and effectiveness. That's what's motivating him. So if you change that, and we look at Japanese companies, same thing with Japanese companies. They're looking at what motivates them. Effectiveness and efficiency. That's their key motivator, not money. Yeah. They make money in order to drive efficiency and long-term 50-year, 100-year goals.
Which is why it's very cool that what's the number one business award recognition you can get in the country is the Deming Award. Yeah. Which is all around process optimization and efficiency. Yeah.
So it's really fascinating to look at the motivators and see how motivators can really drive digital transformation. And if you can change the motivators of a company and understand what truly motivates the company, then you can manipulate those motivators to help with the digital transformation.
Do you see kind of trends? Are there 2 or 3 top problem areas of changes that need to be made that you see where do you as you go in, do you okay, that problem again, like another company that has that issue?
Yeah. Number one is upskilling. Upskilling. This has been a problem for decades, right?
Because training is one of the first things cut when budgets get tight, period. Yeah. We don't have the luxury of having people trained in the technology
which is a mistake.
It's a huge mistake.
I actually had on my show Dr. Madeline Wallace. She's written several books on training and digital transformation, and she's focused in the past on how to have a continuous learning and training organization. And she just wrote a new book that just came out, and her podcast comes out in April with me on embracing digital transformation. But she changed her book, and I thought it was brilliant. It's clever. She changed it into a workbook for individuals because she found something really interesting in organizations, in organizational change. Individuals are waiting for their company to upskill them. And she goes, that's one of the problems. Everyone's waiting to be told what to do. So she changed it, and she goes, I'm going to train you how to become, she called them knowledge sprints, how to retrain yourself with knowledge sprints. So she used agile methodology. So she walks you as an individual through a digital transformation. How can I retrain myself so I become more valuable to companies?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, no one ever talks about that.
Well, that's one of those, it's a mistake that's made. I mean, especially in, again, US centric, it's not as true in some other countries, and there's pros and cons to that. But that, people that complain like these massive layoffs is like most, at will employment is kind of standard across the US. Like companies can let you go for whatever reason. And there are some contracts, but it's not like I worked when I was at Microsoft, and there was in my team that I managed, there was an employee that was questionable whether it was valid or not, but was off for a year. We could not remove her or clear up that role, and it cost the company all that. That doesn't happen in the US like that way. There's more, you could say that there's more power in to the company, to the employers around that. But it's a lesson in all of that is that you own your career, you drive your career, you need to be responsible for that. And so there needs to be, you constantly look at, especially if you work in tech like we do, you're constantly out there refreshing. Hopefully you're excited about it and you're passionate about doing that anyway. But
Well,
you're constantly
and I
looking
think,
at what do I need to do to move the next level, or even maintain? What do I need to be learning? And you should develop a roadmap for yourself, regardless of what your company is doing.
well, I just don't think individuals know how to do it.
Right.
And that's where Dr. Wallace has come in and said, let me show you. It's really cool. It's a workbook that you work through. 2-week sprints. This is what you should be doing this week. Identifying, it's all about identifying areas you want to become better in.
The-
Instead of sitting on your phone just scrolling through Insta reels, right? Or TikTok videos, why don't you learn a new skill? Become invaluable to someone that will pay you to do something really good.
Well, that's
And
one
that
thing
was
I
the
love
concept.
about like Coursera, for example. Like, so
Yeah.
I'm a subscriber monthly, and I'm constantly on there and doing small bits and pieces around there. You do have, if you can find, whether you care about the certificate at the end of the process or not, if you can find a lot of what you want to train on, there's a
A lot of
roadmap
free
for that.
courses. Yeah.
But so something like that where you can then go and piece together, like build your own degree essentially.
Well, and I think that's going to become even more important with generative AI in the mix. Because one thing that we've already started learning with generative AI is it does so much better if you have a subject matter expert that is working it.
Mhm.
If you don't, if you have someone that doesn't understand what they're talking about, understand what they're asking for, they can't validate the results that are coming back. And big businesses are starting to learn this themselves. At first, they were like, I can get rid of all my senior engineers
Or copywriters, I mean, or
or copy
editors.
or
Right.
yeah, or editors. And
Yeah.
the answer is actually no, you cannot. The problem is that we've got junior people that aren't going to learn how to do this stuff. So we've got to skill them up. So companies need to start looking at generative AI as a way to improve competition and efficiency, and give them the ability to train their staff up to become more valuable
Right.
and to be subject matter experts in things instead of monkeys typing. We there's that whole monkeys
Yeah.
typing can do anything. So that's kind of we're at this huge inflection point, right? Where Gen AI is causing this. We've got efficiency driving, people being mandated to come back in the office. There's a lot of really weird things going on. And where you get a lot of disruption, there's a lot of opportunities. So now is the time to pick an area that you want to become an expert in, train yourself up on it, leverage how to use generative AI. You can start new companies. You can be very disruptive in this environment today.
So you talked, yeah, there's a lot. I think you're right. It's an important topic around upskilling, and that is being one area. Any other that kind of top of mind around key process changes that organizations that really need to embrace?
You really need to look at process re-engineering. It's a big failure of most. Map the current processes and first identify which ones you can get rid of.
Yeah.
That's critical. That's what
Yeah,
I would say.
it's because one thing I always talk about with all of my governance articles and presentations and sessions and talks, all the stuff that I do in episodes, is that we create governance around the thing we want to manage. So whether we're developing apps or we're developing content or whatever that is, and there's governance is like a life cycle management and a review and approval process for those things. What we then don't apply is governance around our governance processes.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
is
That's
that
so true.
going back in and looking at, is this still fit?
Is it
Is
still
this still
valid?
working?
Does it still, yeah. And if no one can answer why this process exists, get rid of it.
That's a good indicator. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And something may break.
it's
Okay, then fix it.
I mean, what's hard about this is that it's often, again, we're blind. It's hard to look internally at that to be able to see those things, because the change or the acceptance of things that are outside of that model, like we make adjustments we add manual, it's no longer automated. We're doing that. Oh, but it's just these two things, which we could do very quickly. That all starts adding up. And so as you start skewing that process where it's no longer the right fit and needs to change or needs to go away and be replaced. And sometimes it is better to have a fresh set of eyes, to bring the outside expert in, to do the analysis, share their
It is.
feedback. And to have the small child pointing to the naked king, and pointing out in the crowd, is sometimes that's the only way to see that change has happened underneath you. And it's only been a year, but we need to make this other adjustment based on these things.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot there to unpack. And I would say take a holistic approach to things. Don't just look at point solutions. Generative AI is one of those things. Take a look at it holistically, right? It's not going to replace people.
Yeah.
That's a huge mistake if you do. Can it make your individual people more effective? Yes, it can. So find other things they can do to make your company or your organization more competitive. And that will raise everyone up, which is exactly what we want to see.
Well, you've kind of just addressed it. I was going to ask, like, what advice that you would give to organizations just starting their journey. Are there? I mean, would you suggest that to identify inside the org, like somebody to own and drive this? Is that a way to be accountable?
Absolutely. But first you need to have someone like me or Christian come in and map and help you identify where you're currently at. You know where you're at, but you can't pinpoint it on a map. And that's one of the things that I do with organizations through our government enterprise architecture is we map out your organization, your organizational structure, the personas, the processes, the technology, the hardware, physical locations. And people go, Darren, that's going to take months. I can do a department, I can do a full organization in less than a week. Because why? Because you already know. Yeah. I just have given you a way to articulate it. And it's beautiful when people see it for the first time. They go, wow, I had no idea. We're paying for VMware licenses 5 times over. I can save so much money just by cutting back on I didn't know we did that over. People start seeing things, and it uncovers all this tacit knowledge that's built up into a system. And it's a beautiful thing to watch. Yeah. So that's the first thing. Identify where you're currently at on the map. Then you can start looking at where you want to go.
Isn't it funny? I mean, I remember one of the first articles we wrote together that got, like, Darren and I used to write articles for, well, even before the magazine. So for Rational Software had their
Rose Architect.
Yeah, Rose Architect magazine, and we wrote for every edition of that. And one of them was, I mean, this novel idea, which again, it's people recognize this, but of that you shouldn't start solving a solution until you've correctly, holistically identified what it is that you're trying to solve for. It's a common. I love. It makes me think of the Dilbert, where there's like says, so we've identified a problem, and Wally says like, we'll build a database or around it. It's like, why is your answer always build a database? Well, we like building databases.
Well, because that's what it is. Yeah. No, that's exactly right. You can't have a digital transformation without knowing where you're currently at. You can't. Otherwise, you could be moving in the wrong direction. And most of the time you are. And you only find out later when you've spent $50 million on an NVIDIA cluster that is just heating up your data center. And you don't know what to do with it. I've seen it time and time again.
And then it's just a cluster.
It's a total cluster.
Well, Darren, really appreciate you joining the show.
It's always fun talking to you, Christian.
And folks that want to follow, of course, I'll have the links that are out there on the blog and out on YouTube as well, and links over to your podcast. So that when do you publish during the week? What days?
Right now it's Tuesdays and Thursdays because I have so many guests that have been on the show. So twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then you can also catch my newscast, which is called Embracing Digital This Week, where my wife and I sit down and have a conversation about the top hot technology topics of the week. All AI generated. It's hilarious to hear. It does a great job, but approved by, of course, my wife and myself. So it's a lot of fun.
That sounds like fun. We'll have links to everything out there. So thanks a lot, Darren.
All right. Thanks, Christian.
You've been listening to the CollabTalk Podcast. New episodes are published weekly, and you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, and most other podcast platforms. Thanks for listening.